All right, here we go. Fantastic. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Happy Saturday. I am so excited for this Accepted Academy event this evening for me, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. But I am so excited to present our resident language guru. I've just given you that title, Jazz. I hope you accept it. But I'm very excited to introduce Jazz Cole, who will be taking us through language learning techniques this evening. And without further ado, Jazz, I will pass it on to you.
Hey. Well, thanks everybody. So the first thing I want to talk about is, and you guys can put this in the chat, I want to know what languages you're trying to learn. So, okay, German. That's actually my fourth language. Yeah, Korean, Spanish, French, Italian, Russian, another French person, Mandarin. Oh, Latin. Okay. Avoid forgetting my French. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So this is great. A wide variety. So just to kind of get us started, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. So for me, I am from Lexington, Kentucky. So I'm an East Coaster if you're in the United States. I founded an organization called Multilingual and Philanthropic Incorporated. And I ended up starting this organization after I did a study abroad in Paris during my undergrad. And I had been studying French my entire life. I was like, I'm going to go to fashion school, which is what I did. And I was like, I'm going to learn French and I'm going to move to Paris. And that was me at 11 years old. So after that experience, I realized that everyone should have that kind of experience. So I really had no issues, communicating with people. I mean, there were times where I'm like, okay, I didn't understand that because I'm not used to hearing French on a daily basis. But my experience was so different from the other 15 students who were in the program with me from my university. So I actually have an AA in fashion design and have a bachelor's of science in apparel technical design. So for me, I mainly am like a garment engineer. So I basically was working in Los Angeles doing things like making sure manufacturers in another country could make sure that they were cutting our patterns properly, that they knew all the spec. Like I was doing like the technical things. And what I also understood was from my experience in the industry, I think I worked for a maternity wear at one company at one point. I had also worked for a swimwear company. And then right before the pandemic, I actually was working for a denim company, which is very different from everything else that I had, because my specialty was knitwear. So because my industry was so globalized and I was interacting with so many different people, when I was working at a swimwear company, I remember telling my colleague something, and then she would go in and talk to the sewers about the sample, and they would converse in Spanish. So a lot of the languages that I've learned 10 in my lifetime, and I learned a lot of them because I had to. I mean, French, I learned that for a career-based reason, but then Spanish, I learned because I lived in Los Angeles, and it was really hard not to be around people who spoke Spanish, and I wanted to be a part of the conversation. I had a German friend. I had a roommate from Italy, and so I had met so many different people, and I was like, well, why don't I learn their language? Because first of all, I want to know how they're able to read that. Because German was like, that looks like a bunch of typos. I need to figure out how they actually read that and the structure of it. Dutch, I learned out of curiosity because I had also learned German. So I was like, well, it shouldn't be that different. So, and then I'm also a private tutor. I've been doing that since the pandemic as well. And now I actually am an independent researcher for psycholinguistics, mainly because when I actually moved back to Kentucky during the pandemic, I was like, well, I don't have a job at this point. I'm like everybody else who's unemployed. So I'm like, I'm back home with my parents. So you know what? I'm going to just go learn things. So I took all these online courses on how to teach a language. I was also learning other languages as well, in addition to that. So I kind of took that as an opportunity to learn more. And then later on, I was an au pair in Germany, and that was kind of an unexpected thing. Like I said, my 11-year-old self would never have thought I would end up in Germany, after 4 years of learning the language. So that's kind of my background for the most part. And so what psycholinguistics is, and most people have heard of linguistics because there is the aspect of like linguistics is really just the study of language, not languages. There are a lot of people who are linguists who actually study multiple languages personally, but it's really just studying language, and there's different branches. And so I moved into psycholinguistics. So the official definition is that it's the study of the relationship between linguistic behavior and psychological processes, including the process of language acquisition. However, I feel like all that could just be summed up to the psychology of language learning. So a lot of times it's really just how you process information and transform that into another language. Okay. So I actually am curious because I'm going to be very interactive. I want to know what resources or any techniques have you currently been using to learn a language? I'm kind of curious. Duolingo. Okay. Okay. Your mom. Okay. I'm always jealous of people who have bilingual parents because I had to create that environment for myself. So Fluence, I haven't heard of that one. University courses, Babbel, talking to native speakers. That's good. Language courses, flashcards, TV shows, reading. You guys are doing a lot. Language schools. This is great. Online tutors. Yes. Okay. So these are some common patterns that I see is the Duolingo trap. And that does not mean that Duolingo is not an effective tool. It's just that I think it's a great place to start if you're like, oh, I just want to know basic vocabulary. I want to get started and do something. And Duolingo is very accessible. But sometimes people get the concept that, oh, like I can continue learning this language through Duolingo solely, or when they get to a point where, oh, I just need to be more consistent with Duolingo. And I will just be honest with you, there are native speakers who will go on these apps and they're like, we don't talk like this. I mean, it's very different. And then you'll see people who, I get this all the time. I took 2 years of whatever language, and I don't remember any of this. This actually happens a lot with my adult students, anyone who's over like 30 plus. I've taught a student who is as old as 65, and I hear this often. And a lot of times that has to do with the fact that the structure of language courses in the United States specifically, because that's where my research really is in, they're not always effective. And then you also have people who are receptive in a language, but they can't speak. I actually know plenty of those people. Like when I was in LA, I knew people who were like, yeah, my mother is from, Mexico, and we speak Spanish, but I don't, like she speaks Spanish, but I don't speak Spanish back to her. So we just respond in English. I have a coworker, her uncle lives in Germany, and she texts him back and forth. He speaks German, she speaks English. So, and this is kind of like the aspect of passive and active. So a lot of times people may read it, or they may have opportunities to receive that information, but they may not always have opportunities to actually use it themselves. You're creating your own sentences rather than you having to just listen to whatever information is just given to you. Okay. So this is kind of my methodology that I came up with. After learning a language over and over and over again, you kind of just know where to start. And even with my students, I noticed that this has been a pretty decent pattern to follow. So I always start with purpose-driven learning. I think you need to know why you're learning this language in the first place. Standards and objectives. So you need to have some specific goals as to what you're trying to accomplish. And then there's also building a foundation. That's like the skeleton. You have complexity, because sometimes when you get to a point where you're really good at simple sentences and you just have a lot more you want to say, and it's like, okay, we're good at simple sentences, let's make it more complex. The art of circumlocution. That is actually something that I discovered around the pandemic, which is actually effective because you want to know how to communicate when you are like, I don't know how to say this one word, or I don't know what something is, and really being able to advocate for yourself. And then cultural competency is always important. You need to know how to interact with the people who speak this language. It's not just the language, it's about the people. And then also finding opportunities to expose yourself and actually practice it. So you're not just, like textbook learning, but you're also eventually taking what you learned and then moving that into something that allows you to practice and really move from like beginner to advanced. Because sometimes that intermediate plateau will get you where you're like, I don't really know how, I feel like I'm not getting better, but I'm not getting any worse. Okay, so with purpose-driven learning, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. So it's first of all, why am I learning this language? Because if you don't know why you're learning this language, it's just kind of like, it's like, I want to be a millionaire. Okay, why? What are you going to use it for? I mean, language is not just something that we just learn for fun, which some people can do that. They do learn languages for fun, but it's more of, okay, what am I going to do with it? Like you're giving this language a purpose. And then also, like, what do you actually talk about? A lot of people tell me, Jazz, I want to be fluent. Okay, that's very broad. That's very overwhelming. So we kind of are just narrowing that down to a level of proficiency. So like some things to remember is you got to take control of what you want to learn. This is not, grade school where, you sit in class and they tell you what they think that you should learn. You're learning what you think you need to learn, especially if you're an adult. And it's not like, like you don't need to know every single fruit that is in existence in this language. It's not relevant unless you are going to culinary school and you've got to know these things. It's not relevant. It's not useful. We don't need to worry about that. And it's about making it to your interest. What are you interested in? I mean, I have a student who really loves like sports. He loves sports all around. So I'm thinking, okay, if you really like sports, let's learn to talk about that. Let's learn vocabulary around that because you play sports. This is what you do. We're going to focus on that. And that was the content that I would expose him to when we would work on reading. And like I said, stop trying to be fluent. The goal is proficiency. I'm at a point where I can communicate what I need to communicate. Yeah, so it's like, and it's just really about giving it a purpose. And so moving into goal setting, so standards, like what are we trying to reach? So like I said, with Fluent, you're just kind of all over the place. I don't know what I'm doing. So I typically teach by the CEFR. If you've not heard of this, it's the Central European Framework of Reference for Languages. I love this because the chart focuses more on, okay, what can I do at this level? It's not like, oh, I know how to conjugate in the conditional tense in my target language. It's more of, I know how to talk about this. I know how to have a basic conversation on this. It's less on concepts, more on communication. So like if you were to take an exam and let's say like the Goethe Institute, they might give you an exam for language certification in German. Okay. If you go into an exam and they ask you these questions, can you actually answer them? Okay. So to show you what that looks like, this is from the Council of Europe, but this is what it looks like. So you have your A1 all the way to C2. And it very much, what I like about this chart, and I actually use it with my students, you can find it on their website as well, is like they categorize it into 3 categories. So understanding, speaking, and writing. And in all those categories, they show you what you're actually able to do. So as an example with A1 is, so for listening and reading, it says here, I can recognize familiar words, very basic phrases concerning myself, my family, intermediate concrete surroundings when people speak slowly and clearly. Okay, so if I was speaking slowly and clearly in your target language, you'd be able to say, yes, I got it. Same thing with reading. I understand familiar names, words, very simple sentences. So it's more so as, okay, I know how to conjugate verbs, but can I actually read that? Can I actually make my own sentences? Same here with spoken interactions. And then also with writing as well. So those are typically your 4 main forms of communication. It's usually reading and writing, and then there's speaking and listening. Okay. And so the next part, is the skeleton. So when you first starting to learn a language from the very beginning, like I have no prior knowledge, it's like, how does this work? Because you need to know how it's structured so that you can be able to input things that you want to say. So the alphabet, I'd start with my students who are very, very beginner. I'm like, okay, we're going to learn the alphabet because the way that letters are pronounced in that language might be different than English, which is my native language. So it's more of, okay, what does the accent mark do to that? Like if you're learning French, you should know that there are 5 accent marks and they do change the pronunciation of letters. Their pronunciation rules. For me, my background is mostly in Latin and Germanic based languages. Arabic is kind of like it's my 10th language, is kind of the one that's different from all the other ones. So they actually still use a phonetic alphabet. So it's kind of learning, okay, how do they pronounce that? What does that do? What does that little dot mean? Those kinds of things. How do they write? If they write from left to right or right to left, because that way you're getting your mind to think about how can I communicate? Like how can I read something and actually be able to say it clearly in the sense of being understood versus because when you read something and you're not really sure of the pronunciation rules, it makes it harder for people to understand you. It's like you should be able to read a story like of any kind and be like, I may not know what I just read, but someone else just heard what I read and said, yeah, that was a good pronunciation. Sentence structure. A lot of times with English, for example, we have a SVO structure. So it's subject, a verb, and an object. Okay. Some maybe kind of like Italian or Spanish, they don't really need the subject because the verb conjugation will stand in its place. Things like that. So from there, it's just more of just learning like just the foundation of how this works. Okay. So from there, like when you have a good foundation, it's a matter of, okay, I can make simple sentences, but how can I make them a little bit more complex? Because a lot of times I might have students where I'll ask them a question and they'll say, you know, I had a lot more to say about that topic, but I just felt my vocabulary was very limited. I wanted to say a lot more. And also, it can sound kind of awkward speaking in simple sentences. So basically, it's about like I said, the formula. How does this sentence structure? And then you go from like left to right. So I typically will learn all the subject pronouns. I learn all of the verb conjugations. I go through different vocabulary based on, most of the time I learn vocabulary as I go. I mean, you're reading things, getting exposure to native speaker content, and that way you're kind of building your vocabulary that way. And then for the most part, it's just once you've got the simplicity mastered, then we kind of learn, okay, in that sentence structure, how can I add in connecting words like conjunctions and things like that? So in this example, this is a simple sentence. I eat an apple, or I'm eating an apple, because in English, we don't use that. We use present progressive. But the structure, like I said, is subject, verb, and object. So we're learning the pronouns, which is I, you, he, she, we, they, the basic form of conjugation. And typically when people start, they are learning the indicative, which is mainly stating facts. And then from there, we just kind of learn object with articles. So in English, we don't really have genders, but that does apply if you are learning a language like French, Spanish, or even Portuguese. So this is French. So in this case, like I said, you learn the article with like its gender. So une pomme is going to be feminine. So je mange une pomme. So we kind of know that because in French, the reason for that is because I have never seen a noun without its article. It always has this. This is an indefinite article. So an apple, like not any specific apple. You might see like la pomme, if it's like this specific apple, you might see, but yeah, overall, you just see different articles, but there always is an article there because sometimes the changing of the gender can actually change the meaning of the word. So a lot of times, like with the word livre, like le livre in French is usually a book, but la livre is a form of like weight. Like I believe it's like half a kilo or something like that, or like a pound. So what you're talking about, most people when you talk to native speakers, they generally know what you're trying to say, but it's just helpful to know that, okay, the gender does make a difference. And then we're going to make that complex. So if I wanted to say, to give a reason why I'm eating this apple, je mange une pomme parce que j'ai faim. So I'm eating this apple because I'm hungry. Okay, so we've just added a connector word in there. So parce que, to kind of make that. So it's not two separate, simple sentences. It just sounds really awkward to say, I'm eating an apple, I'm hungry. It's like more of like being able to communicate a little bit more information. Okay. And then the next part is the art of circumlocution. I love teaching this because this gives you the tools to be able to stay in your target language without having to revert to other, like your L1 or whatever your language, your first language is. So a lot of times it has to do with statements like asking what something is. So learning things like qu'est-ce que c'est in French or was ist das in German. You know, it's learning how to ask someone what is that, and they will tell you in the target language, oh, that is a, whatever the object is. And also, it helps to learn descriptive words like adjectives. Like, how can you describe something? If I don't know what an apple, I know what an apple is, but I don't know what the word for that is in Spanish. Okay, I'm going to learn all the kinds of words. It's red. It has this particular shape. It comes from a tree. Learning how to describe things as best as you can. And this is a trap that some students fall into, where they get to a point where they're like, "Yeah, I understood what you said." And I feel that's been, my experience, especially early on, because you're just kind of overwhelmed and your brain thinks you're in a dangerous situation where some native speaker is talking to me and I have no idea what they're saying. And it's more of asking for clarification. And that's like where questions or statements like, so what I think you said was, and you explain in your own vocabulary what you think you heard. And that gives them the chance to say, okay, maybe I need to say this another way in words they understand, like simpler words. Or, it gives them to chance to say, no, that's not, no, that's not what I said, or yeah, that's exactly what I said. So it's really about advocating for yourself, because you just don't want to be passive, because sometimes this can actually be very dangerous. You don't want to be in a situation where someone's asking you to do something and you have no idea what you just agreed to. So especially if you're in a foreign country. So just to give a really good example of this. So my host dad in Germany, I remember he had asked me to do something, and I was kind of in that mindset where I'm like, I have no idea what he's saying, and I'm scared to ask. So I was like, yeah, sure, I got it. So basically, one day he wrote me a letter, like a little note on the kitchen table, and basically I could read it. He was asking me, I need you to straighten up the living room every day. I was like, oh. And he's like, oh, that's all I had to do? And I was like wondering why he was so upset. And so one of the things I could have done. So the question is, kannst du das Wohnzimmer jeden Tag aufräumen? Okay, can you clean the living room or straighten up the living room every day? All right, what I could have asked is something like, was heißt aufräumen? If I didn't know what aufräumen was, I'd say, what is that? How is that called? Or was bedeutet, which is like, what does that mean? If I didn't know what Wohnzimmer was, I could say, ist das Wohnzimmer das große Zimmer mit dem Sofa und Fernseher? So is the living room the big room with the sofa and the TV? Like, okay, is that what we're talking about? Ich verstehe dich nicht, was du zu mir gefragt hast. So I did not understand what you have asked me. So those are ways to say, okay, there's a communication issue here. I need to fix this. So that way, again, like I said, you're advocating for yourself. You're getting the information that you need. So that way you don't have issues where I'm like, why is he all upset? So it's really just asking for clarity. And then we're moving into cultural competency. So here, this is about learning about the people, like the status quo. This is kind of like when you think of like that iceberg visualization, like culture is not just, oh, this is the kind of flag they have and they have these particular holidays. It's just, sometimes it just really is just day-to-day mannerisms. Learning, like when I was going to Paris to study abroad, I remember studying so much, not just the language, but really just getting, I was really avid person on YouTube. I was like, I need to find expats. I want to know like what they did, things like faux pas, like things that you should not do in this country. And then I would just kind of relay that so that when I went to the country, it wasn't just like I was drawing unnecessary attention to myself. And it's not about, like, oh, I'm going to conform to whatever their culture is. It's more about being respectful and knowing that you're in a foreign country and you don't have the upper hand here. For me, I had experiences where I saw some of my colleagues who literally they just got snubbed because they just didn't speak French. And it's not because they didn't know how to speak English. It was because they didn't want to speak English. I'm like, I'm in my home country, you know? So it was more of just asking, being respectful, like learning, okay, this is the best way to say this in this situation. It's more than that. Sometimes it's also learning things like accents and dialects, because people in the north of France speak very different from people in the south of France. I actually was an ambassador at my college and I was giving tours to like prospective students. And I had a mom and a daughter. They were from Marseille. I could not understand a single word they said. So it's really about that's the exposure that we're looking at. And also like geography. People don't understand sometimes how geography is so important. It's like, okay, so you're from, let's say, oh, like, oh, this person's from Germany. Okay, where in Germany are you from? Because that makes a difference. And every Bundesland, like every territory, is going to be different. They might say things differently. They might use different things. Like in German, there's four cases: the nominative, dative, accusative, and genitive. Genitive is very seldomly used, but I've been told that most people in Bayern use it. And they're like, Bayern is where all the stereotypes come from. All the German stereotypes. They're like, oh, just give that's Bayern. So a lot of times you may be in a different place and you realize that these people don't act the same way as people in the South. You know. And then also just general history. This is great when you are trying to be a part of when you're trying to be a part of conversations. I remember when I was in Germany, we had a brunch with my host family's family. I think their aunt was actually coming into town from Portugal, and she is a veterinarian there. But we were having brunch, and I remember we were having a conversation about like blockchains and like manufacturing and like um, commerce, and I had something to say about it. So for me, it's like I know a little bit about their country. I know a little bit about how business is conducted. I know something about that to where I can actually be a part of the conversation rather than just being someone that just sits there. One of the things I learned about Germans is they like to like debate. They love to talk about things and they like that you have an opinion, like those kinds of things. I know French people like to debate as well. I mean, getting plugged into news, like don't just have a conversation and be like, I speak French and that's all I know how to say is just where's the bathroom? And that it's like more of, oh, hey, I heard on the news that this is happening in your country. Like you as a native speaker, how do you feel about that? Or this is my thoughts on that. I mean, I remember talking to a friend of mine that I met here in my hometown, and she's from Germany. And I remember asking her about the recent election. So it's not just about, like, that's part of the aspect of language learning. It's not just learning the language just so you can use it for traveling and things like that. You never know. You might meet someone who becomes your friend, and it's like, well, why don't we talk about this? I feel like it's just that we don't want to just stay on the surface. We want to go below the surface and learn how to talk about things we care about. If you're a person who really loves talking about animal rights, you know, learn how to talk about that. That's the thing, because you just don't want to be like what I call a one-trick pony. I only know how to say certain things. So that's part of like exposure, like learning new vocabulary through watching the news. You are exposed to different accents. You're exposed to what's going on, because if you're thinking about traveling to these places, you at least want to know, like, what's going on, what's changes in government, those kinds of things. And then the other part of that is exposure and practice. It's like, how can I practice more? How can I keep learning? Because language learning, I'm going to be honest with you, like I said, there's no such thing as fluent, because you will never completely learn a full language. I mean, really, like language changes throughout history. I mean, like English now is so different than it was 1,000 years ago. So you're constantly staying plugged in. You're constantly staying connected to your native speaker friends. And also, a lot of people feel like they don't want to sound stupid. I have a student who will take 5 minutes to answer a question. And when I ask her, I'm like, okay, what are you thinking? Like, how would you respond? Like, what did you understand? And she understood everything perfectly. she just was like, I just was afraid I was going to be wrong. And I'm like, it's part of the process. I mean, I remember when I was in my AP French class back in my last year in high school, we were doing this whole tongue twister. I don't remember exactly how it went. It was like 500 saints living together without blood or whatever. It was like it was just a tongue twister. And they're like, Jazz, do you know what you just said? I'm like, no. He's like, you said 500 saints without breasts. I was like, oh. And it's just like, oh, okay. But I learned something, you know. The point is it's like it's part of the process. You get your reps in. And then also, like I said, eventually you kind of get immersed into it. Okay. So the other part about that is how can I do what I normally do every single day, but switch the language content? Like my phone is never in English. Because at that point, you know where your message app is. You know what the icon is. You just need to make sure you know what the word for setting and language is in case you need to change it. But mostly that the more exposed you are to that, you're like, oh, I know I know what that says. I can read that perfectly fine. A lot of times music. I'm pretty sure there is music that you probably like in another language. You know, if you really like yoga or working out, I'm pretty sure there are plenty of people around the world who are making workout videos in your target language and things like that. I love foreign entertainment. I actually prefer no subtitles because I like to rely on my own visualization to kind of get a sense of what's going on. So I can kind of listen. I don't know, I find it distracting. Some people really find that helpful. It's up to you. But yeah. So I'm going to turn this over to you guys. So I don't know if you have any frustrations or any questions. Oh. And you can also come off mute if you want to as well. Okay. Oh, Claudia, you raised your hand? No.
Yes, thank you so much, Jess. Sorry, my voice is a little bit horrible because I was sick for a couple of days. Thank you so much. My question basically is, do you have any recommendations I know we talked about vocabulary,
Mhm.
but what's like your best recommendation for that? Because I have tried flashcards, I have tried digital, like some apps and stuff, and I still feel like it doesn't sink in sometimes, and I get frustrated, like I know that word, but I forgot again. And then I get frustrated more and more. So what's your best way to learn vocabulary? At this point, I don't know how I learned English because that was so many years ago.
Mm.
And sometimes I wonder, like, how did I learn English? And I have to now learn Russian. It gets frustrating. So yeah, vocabulary, best practices, if you have any recommendations for that.
Yeah, so vocabulary, for me, it's mostly, I mean, I usually will find whatever the content is. Like, let's say if I'm reading a blog about something. Usually I will use translation tools with that. So I'm reading it all in the target language and I will go through and I'm like, okay, what did I read? What did I understand? And if there's words that are really tripping you up, like I just feel like this stunts me from understanding the rest of the sentence, you can look that up. I always tell people that translation tools are not, it's not cheating. So that kind of helps for me. And then I'm also seeing it multiple times. There's actually an extension on Chrome. It's called Toucan. I don't know if it's still available, but I think it is. What it does, it's an extension and it shows up on your browser. So when you're reading things, like random words will be in your target language, and it actually will, like when you click on it, it will tell you what it is in your L1, and then it will save that and you can go back and go review those terms. Like, oh, I always get this wrong. Because it will, like I said, it'll quiz you and things like that. Um, yeah, I think that's like what I would pretty much recommend. Okay. Okay. Laura, I see you have your hand up.
Oh, hi. Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was unmuted that whole time. My question kind of follows from Claudia's a little bit, which is, with French, I've tried a bunch of different ways to try and acquire parts of that language. And so I've got books, I've got, the software programs, I've got, watch TV, right? So all of these things. And so what would be your recommendation for setting a priority of a basic learning model? Because I'll read something and realize, ooh, my pronunciation is horrible. And so then I thought, well, maybe I should focus on pronunciation first. And then I'm doing pronunciation and then I don't know what I'm reading. So maybe I should focus on vocabulary. So do you have a suggestion for kind of bringing a very kind of basic learning model together that is helpful and not as frustrating as what I've been trying to do to myself?
Okay. Yeah. So generally, like, especially, like, I'm assuming you're probably talking about like as a beginner,
Yeah.
but okay. Yeah. So for beginners, typically I will tell them like when we read stuff, I'm like, okay, this is an article we're reading. This is, we just talked about, whatever conjugation we just learned, we're going to see it in real terms. So a lot of times when I will go in and I'm like, okay, we're reading this, they'll read it out loud and they'll focus on pronunciation, which is typically how I do it the first time around. Okay. Yeah. And then I will usually take note. Okay, there's certain things that, oh, you missed that accent mark or things like that. I will give them notes on the pronunciation. We'll go back and reread it. And I'm like, this time I want you to focus on what you read. And a lot of times when people read, they like to focus like word for word. Like I'll tell a student, okay, so what did you read? And they'll like I ate an apple. It's like, no. I want you to tell me the gist of what you just read, like what you understood. Because it's not about like word for word, because a lot of times languages may have a different grammar structure than your L1. So like when I learned German, their structure is so different because like if you have a sentence with two verbs, the last verb goes to the end of the sentence. So I had to think differently. It's like, okay, so I am, and then all your information, and then it's like, what do I do with that information? So what I think is a basic model is just, of course, reading it for pronunciation first, okay? Maybe, maybe you might self-assess. Okay, I realize I missed that accent mark, or I may not have read that properly. That's fine. And then read it again for comprehension. So sometimes when you're reading things, you don't want to focus on too many things at once, and then because that can be overwhelming. So it's more of, okay, pronunciation. All right, now let's read for comprehension. And if something, like, I don't want you, like, when it comes to reading, I don't want people to just feel like they have to look up every single word that they don't know, because a lot of times you can find out what these words mean through context. Like if I didn't know what, a smartphone is, like, for example, I don't know what that word is. It's more of, okay, I'm looking at what they said about this object. Like, okay, so that sounds like that's something that you use to call people on, or something like that. Okay, I think I know what that is. So yeah, so it's just, I always tell people read the whole thing and then just go back and like I said, it's about, do I understand what I read? Am I understanding what I read? Yeah. Okay. Raja, I see your hand. Okay, I think you're on mute. Okay, there
All
you
right. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. All right. So my question is with regard to um so like for active learning of a language, it's helpful to have an environment where you practice, right? Like where you have to use the language, okay? And I think I am practicing English a lot. Like I do research in it and I can speak it and all, like I use this community, thank God. I speak to the girls a lot for English, but with my French, it's not like I don't really speak French on an everyday basis. And I wanted to ask, like, if you don't have that environment, how do you practice the language?
Like kind of, how do I create that environment if I don't have people around to speak it?
Can I? Yes. And I know, like, I used to speak French before. I just lost this ability, like, to just speak it fluently. I can read it well, and I do research in French and all, but I don't speak it very well.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, like I was saying in the very beginning, I'm always jealous of people who have like bilingual parents because, and they don't speak the language. And I'm like, what? I know people like that. So for me, like, because I had to create my environment. So one of the ways that I met people is by the grace of technology. So I actually used to get on like Bumble BFF in my area. And when I was living in Los Angeles, it really wasn't that difficult to find because it's a very diverse community. And I ended up finding someone who was French. She was actually an au pair in the US. And actually, she inspired me to be an au pair later on. But we got together, we were hanging out, and we would go back and forth in English and French. And we went on a hike. So we had a great time. And then I met someone else who her husband was German. And so we got together. And actually, that's actually how I met my first client. So she's like, yeah, my husband is German. So we got together. I had learned it for a little bit, but she was learning as well. So we were actually two language learners trying to practice together. Another component was I put on my Instagram profile that I am a multilingual American. I would put like the flags of all the languages I would speak. And I had someone reach out to me when I was still in California. She said, "Oh, hi. Like I actually am in LA studying English. I am a Mexican French person. My dad is Mexican. I'm French, and it'd be really great to get together and we can just speak in English." I was like, "Huh." So it's just amazing how you can kind of find these people within your communities. And a lot of times, even if you are not in the same location, there's also plenty of ways where you can find people to just kind of get on Zoom and just talk back and forth. One of my roommate, who is Italian, even though we don't live together anymore, we still will go back and forth. And I'm like, hey, I just learned the congiuntivo. I know how to use this now. And so she would be inclined to say, okay, yeah, that's really cool. And we would just go back and forth because she felt like, okay, she's learning more. So that means I can communicate more with Jazz because she has a higher level. So a lot of times it's just a matter of making friends because the thing is, we love having friends, like we love our friends. And so as you're building a friendship with them, you eventually start sharing the language. And a lot of times, I know that there's sometimes where people may not be interested in learning their language, and that's perfectly fine also. But for me, I felt like I could be a better friend to her if I learned her language. So yeah, stay connected to them. And especially because when I travel with the purpose of making friends because I feel like I have a reason to come back. And I'm like, oh, I have someone I can practice with. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? Oh, Claudia, you have another question?
Yeah, sorry. It's also related to Laura's question. Do you have any recommendations for that daily exposure? Because all of us are busy. And I'm sure we have dissertations to write, things to read, and meetings to go, etc. I always say, okay, I'm gonna practice for like 30 minutes every day. It kind of never happens. So, do you have any recommendations for that daily exposure? I tried one thing this year, and is, listening to this Russian podcast every day on my way to the gym, and it works. But then after that, I'm just like, ugh, and my Duolingo, notifications kind of force me to at least take 5 minutes to do it. So yeah, do you have any recommendations for that daily exposure? Especially if we don't have those friends yet to practice with.
Okay. Yeah. So for daily exposure, a lot of times so I don't know if any of you guys are like me. I like to think out loud. I live alone, so I'm just like going through my to-do list for the day, all those things. I learn to think differently. So I'm like, okay, so we're going to consciously make an effort to talk about like out loud, whatever we're thinking, and we're going to talk out loud. So that kind of gives you the sense of just being able to get comfortable using the language. A lot of times for me, when it comes to daily exposure, just like part of that also is like vocabulary increasing, but I listen to music all the time. And for me, like when I started listening to music, it was like I would turn I turned the volume. I don't recommend this if you have hearing problems, but I would turn the volume up to where I couldn't hear my own voice. And I would just listen. And eventually, kind of like children, it started sounding like gibberish. But then eventually, as I started listening to the lyrics, that actually helped my pronunciation. So, and I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. But then eventually later on, I'm like, okay, as I've been listening to the same song for a period of time, I'm like, oh, okay, I think I know what they're saying. Or at least, and that also at the same time improves your pronunciation. A lot of times what I do is I actually watch vlogs like on YouTube. There's so many people that just in other countries who are just talking about their lives. There's one YouTuber I love. I think her name is Marika Amelia. She is a German medical student and she's just talking about like she just shows everything she's making. And I'm like, she made bagels from scratch, and she would describe the ingredients that she was using. She would talk about her day, and it's just interesting to be able to see people who are in your age range who are speaking normal. That's a great way to learn dialects. It's also a great way to learn like colloquial vocabulary. Okay, how are young people talking with each other? You know, like what do young people, what do people my age say? Like some people I notice that they'll integrate certain things, there's certain English words into what they're saying. And then for me, I kind of incorporate that in my vocabulary because a lot of times people are out of like all the words in a particular language, most likely you're using like 20% of those words all the time. So yeah. I've also been talking about podcasts. Podcasts are really good. I love those too. Um, I think like for me, like when I first started, I was listening to like it was like Language Pod 101, and they would just do like vocabulary lessons and like expressions. And I'm like, okay. Also, another thing that I love to do is if you're trying to start from scratch, I love YouTube channels that teach the language in the language. So you're kind of like cutting out L1 anyway. I always tell people just cut out the middleman, like just get to the language. It's like this is a pen. I'm looking at it, I'm saying, like, for example, in French, un stylo. You see what it is, you heard what I said. Okay, cool. And then they kind of start speaking at um, a very easy to understand pace. One of the channels I really like is Dutchies to Be. She teaches Dutch, obviously, and so she has subtitles in Dutch and English, and she speaks it a way where I'm like, okay, I think I understood what she was trying to teach me. Yeah. And then, can you recommend French YouTubers who are doing vlogs? Usually find English native speakers do it better. Okay, so French YouTubers. So I actually have quite a bit. Actually, on my website, I put all of these resources to be more specific. I think some that stand out to me the most, I love, I'm trying to think of her name. I think her name is Marina. She actually does yoga. I love her because like on Thursdays is my yoga day. And so a lot of times you just kind of see um you'll notice repetitions. You're like, okay, chien tête en bas. Oh, downward facing dog. You see what she's doing and you hear it. Okay, cool. I'm trying to think another one that I really like. I think it's called Your Best French. And so she is a French speaker. All of her videos are in French, and she basically she travels, she takes you along to different parts of France. So I actually like that because you kind of see these little villages versus like just Paris, things like that. So those are kind of like my go-tos I can think of off the top of my head. Also, Easy French. I love all the easy language YouTube channels. Easy French is great because they have their super easy French videos, which is just absolute beginners, but then they have videos where they have a topic and they go around and talk to people on the street. It's like, what can you get for €5? And you just hear native speakers telling you in their own way of speaking how they would answer that. Yeah, and it also has subtitles in both English and French. Yeah. Okay. Katarina says, searching for comprehensible input on YouTube can help you find that like language learning, the language understandable without knowing the language yet content. Yes, I do agree with that. So I think if you can just take on the persona of being a child, it makes it a lot easier. It's like, I don't know what this is. Like I'm just kind of input. Like when you think about children, and that's actually a big component of my methodology as well. Thinking of, okay, when two people are arguing and you have this baby who starts crying. I mean, they can sense what's going on. It's more as they get older, they start understanding, okay, they said this word. Now I'm going to repeat it. It's probably why you need to watch what you say around kids. But generally, like, okay, I hear it. I'm going to repeat it. I remember when I was in Germany, I had our family friend actually lived there, and she's from there, in Dormagen, and her neighbors were from Poland. And I remember they invited me over for dinner one time, and they would speak to each other in Polish, and they would speak to me in German. And for me, I know that sometimes people get uncomfortable with that, but I actually like being in situations where I'm forced to kind of figure things out. For me, I love the challenge of it. Some people may not, but I remember they were talking and I heard Forsha. Forsha, what's that? I'm like, oh, das ist Geld. Okay, that's money. Okay, I learned a Polish word. You just kind of pick things out and you're like, that word stands out to me. So that's kind of like the main thing that I kind of have for that. Yeah. I mean, I had no intention of learning Polish at that time, but I was like, oh, but I felt like just because you're in an environment where you feel like I don't know what's going on doesn't mean that you actually are just like, oh, I don't know what's going on, like English. It's like, okay, you're not in danger. You're just unfamiliar. You just kind of have to use a lot of visual cues to kind of figure out um, trying to figure out what's going on. Like when you watch a movie, okay, like he got upset and ran out the door. Okay, she must have said something upsetting. I don't know exactly what that was, but I can kind of put together two and two of what generally happened. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Kid shows are good. Kid shows are good if you're trying to like learn like simple vocabulary, simple sentence structure. That's actually very helpful. Yeah. Also, content that you're familiar with, but in the other language. I know, like with Disney, they have a whole channel where they have just Disney songs in French. I think they do it in other languages too, but that was actually I think when I was primarily focused on French at the time, when I was just bilingual, and the one thing I learned, and you still have to make sure you're careful about this with translations, is that sometimes people may not translate things like word for word. Like the word for like the song A Whole New World is translated as Ce rêve bleu, which means this blue dream. And I'm like, and the lyrics are really different because it's based off of culture. Because some people might not understand what that meant. Or sometimes when people use humor that's only unique to a country. I think when this is um, primarily specific to English, but I remember when I was growing up, I loved That 70s Show. But they did a British version and they had to edit the script because people in Britain would not understand the American references. And that just wouldn't fly. It just didn't fly because they're British people. Why are they talking about like President General Ford in a foreign country? So that's something you have to kind of keep in mind. But so like if you're looking at the subtitles or you're like, I know this song, but this does not add up to what I know the lyrics to be, it's because they do change the lyrics when they translate it. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if anyone has any other questions or anything. Yeah. So another thing is if you'd like to get in touch with me. So I actually have a couple of different ways you can communicate with me. I have a website. I keep all my resources on there. And I actually review a lot of language learning resources, and I just put them on my website if I think they're really effective. You could always email me, and I'm always posting videos about language learning techniques, anything that I feel like is really important along the lines of language learning and international education on there as well. So thanks you guys for hanging out with me. Of course.
Thanks, Jazz. I'm going to, and thank you everyone for attending. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and close the session. Thank you so much, everyone.